Wife discovers cheating on their wedding anniversary and plans revenge. Sarah slowly opened her eyes, a smile forming on her lips as she remembered what date it was. 10 years of marriage. A decade of love, laughter, tears, and shared dreams. She turned over in bed, expecting to find Mark's sleeping face, but his side was empty. Sarah's heart raced for a moment before she heard the soft noise coming from the kitchen. He was preparing breakfast. Sarah got up, put on her silk robe, and walked silently to the bedroom door. He stopped for a moment, watching Mark's back, focused on his culinary task. She felt a wave of love and gratitude so intense it almost knocked her over. "Good morning, love," Sarah said softly, entering the kitchen. Mark turned around, a smile lighting up his face. "Hey, sleepyhead. I wanted to surprise you with breakfast in bed." Sarah walked over, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You surprise me every day, just by being here." Mark kissed her forehead affectionately. "Happy wedding anniversary, my love." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "Happy birthday, Mark. I love you so much that sometimes I think my heart is going to explode." They stood there, cuddling in the sunny kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee and toast in the air. Sarah closed her eyes, wanting to record every detail of this moment in her memory. The texture of Mark's shirt beneath his fingers, the heat of his body, the gentle rhythm of his breathing. "I have a surprise for you tonight," Sarah whispered, her heart racing with anticipation. Mark pulled away a little, looking into her eyes curiously. "Really? And what would it be?" Sarah smiled mysteriously. "If I tell you, it won't be a surprise anymore, will it? But trust me, it will be special." Little did Sarah know that her world was about to turn upside down. At that moment, however, all she felt was love, hope, and the certainty that the next 10 years would be even better than the previous ones. The couple sat down to breakfast, chatting animatedly about shared memories and future plans. Sarah watched Mark speak, her heart overflowing with affection. How could she have imagined that behind that enchanting smile and loving eyes hid a secret that would destroy everything she believed to be true? The afternoon wore on, and Sarah was at home, putting the finishing touches on the surprise she had planned for Mark. Her heart throbbed with anticipation as she carefully set the table, placing the candles in the silver candlesticks they had received at the wedding. Mark's cell phone rang, abandoned on the kitchen counter. Sarah hesitated for a moment, but decided to answer, thinking it might be something important about his work. "Hello," she said, taking the device. Silence on the other side. Then a female voice, hesitant. "Mark? Is that you?" Sarah's stomach twisted. "No, it's his wife." "Who's talking?" More silence, followed by a click. The call dropped. With shaking hands, Sarah looked at her cell phone. A notification flashed on the screen, one new message. His finger hovered over the icon, his mind conflicted. She shouldn't. Trust was the foundation of their marriage. But something in that woman's voice. With her heart racing, Sarah opened the message. "Mark, love, I can't wait to see you tonight. These stolen moments are what keep me alive. I love you." Jessica. Sarah's world fell apart. The room started to spin, and she held onto the wall to keep from falling. Hot tears ran down his face as he read and reread the message, hoping that the words would change, that everything would be nothing more than a cruel nightmare. But it was real. Painfully real. The sound of the key in the lock brought her back to reality. Mark entered, a bouquet of red roses in his hands and a smile on his face. Smile that disappeared when seeing Sarah's condition. "Sarah? What happened?" he asked, concern in his voice. Sarah looked up, meeting his. The pain in his chest was almost physical. "Who is Jessica?" His voice came out as a broken whisper. Mark's face turned pale. The roses slipped from her hands, falling to the floor with a thud. The silence that followed was deafening. "Sarah, I can explain." He began, taking a step towards her. "Don't you dare come near me." Sarah screamed, her voice filled with pain and anger. "How could you? 10 years, Mark. 10 years." Tears were now flowing freely down her face, her breathing ragged with sobs. Mark stood still, words of empty apology dying on his lips. Sarah looked at the set table, the candles still out, the bottle of champagne on ice. Everything was prepared for a celebration that now seemed like a cruel joke of fate. "It's over," she whispered, more to herself than to Mark. "It's all over." As Sarah stumbled into her room, closing the door behind her, a storm of emotions consumed her. Pain, anger, betrayal, and something more. Something cold and calculating that was beginning to take shape in the back of his mind. Mark stood in the room, surrounded by the pieces of his shattered marriage, unaware that the real storm was yet to come. Sarah remained locked in her room for hours, tears drying on her face as a storm of emotions consumed her. Outside, she could hear Mark pacing back and forth, occasionally knocking on the door, begging to talk. But their pleas fell on deaf ears. With shaking hands, Sarah picked up a wedding photo from the nightstand. His fingers traced the outline of Mark's smiling face, a smile that now seemed like a mask of lies. "How could I be so blind?" she whispered to herself, her voice breaking. Suddenly, a wave of anger invaded her. Sarah threw the photo against the wall, the glass shattering into 1,000 pieces, just like her heart. The noise made Mark knock on the door harder. "Sarah, please. Let me explain." She stood up abruptly, opening the door violently. Mark stepped back, surprised by the sudden appearance. "Explain what, Mark?" Sarah screamed, her red, swollen eyes flashing with fury. "Explain how you destroyed 10 years of marriage? How you made a fool of me?" Mark tried to get closer, but Sarah held up her hand, keeping him at a distance. "Sarah, I made a terrible mistake. I didn't mean to." "Didn't you want to?" she interrupted, her voice thick with sarcasm and pain. "So it was an accident? You tripped and fell into her arms." Sarah's words were like stabs, each one making Mark flinch. He opened his mouth to speak, but she continued, "You know what's worse, Mark? I had a surprise planned for tonight. I was going to tell you that." His voice trailed off, the tears coming back in full force. "That I'm pregnant." The shock on Mark's face was palpable. He staggered back, as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Pregnant? Sarah, I didn't know." "Of course I didn't know," she screamed, the pain in her voice echoing off the walls. "You were too busy with your precious Jessica." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could hear her own heart beating furiously in her ears. She looked at Mark, the man she had loved for so long, now a stranger before her. "I want you to leave," Sarah said finally, her voice low and dangerous. "Now." Mark took a desperate step forward. "Sarah, please, we can talk about this. We can fix it." "To repair?" She laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Some things, once they're broken, can't be fixed, Mark." As she watched Mark gather up some clothes and leave the apartment, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The pain was still there, pulsing and raw, but now it was accompanied by cold determination. She gently stroked her still flat belly, whispering to the baby growing inside her, "Don't worry, little one. Mommy will take care of everything." At that moment, as the last light of the day disappeared over the New York skyline, Sarah began to mentally draw the first outlines of her plan. Mark had destroyed her perfect world, and now she would do the same to his. Revenge would be sweet, and Sarah was determined to savor every moment. The days that followed were a blur of intense emotions for Sarah. She oscillated between moments of deep sadness and bouts of fierce anger. The apartment, once a haven of love, now seemed to suffocate her with memories. One particularly difficult afternoon, the doorbell rang. Sarah hesitated, her heart racing at the thought that it could be Mark. But when he opened the door, he found his best friend, Olivia. "Oh, Sarah," Olivia whispered, pulling her into a tight hug. Sarah collapsed into her friend's arms, the tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. "I don't know what to do, Liv. I feel so lost." Olivia gently guided her to the couch, holding her hands. "You're not alone in this, sweetheart. I'm here for you." Sarah wiped away her tears, her voice shaking as she spoke. "He called again today. He wants to talk, he wants to explain. As if there's any explanation that can fix this." Olivia frowned. "And what did you tell him?" "Nothing," Sarah replied, a dangerous glint coming into her eyes. "I didn't answer. I actually have a plan." Olivia leaned forward, intrigued. "What kind of plan?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then decided to trust her friend. "I'll pretend I want to hear his explanations. I'll pretend I'm considering forgiving him." "But why?" Olivia asked, confused. "Why put yourself through this?" Sarah stood up, walking to the window. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman she barely recognized, her eyes hard, her mouth set in a determined line. "Because Liv, I want him to suffer," Sarah said, her voice low and intense. "I want him to feel every ounce of the pain he caused me. And to do that, I need him to let his guard down." Olivia joined her at the window, concern evident on her face. "Sarah, this doesn't sound healthy. You're pregnant, you need to think about the baby." Sarah turned sharply. "It's exactly because of this baby that I'm doing this. He doesn't deserve a lying, cheating father." The silence that followed was heavy. Olivia watched her friend, barely recognizing the fierce and determined woman before her. "What exactly are you planning, Sarah?" Olivia asked hesitantly. Sarah smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll see, Liv. Everyone will." At that moment, Sarah's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Mark. "Can we talk? Please give me a chance to explain." Sarah looked at Olivia, then back at the phone. With steady fingers, she typed her response. "Okay. Tomorrow, at our favorite cafe. At 3. Sending the message, Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline course through her body. The first step of his plan was in motion. "Sarah," Olivia said softly, "I'm afraid of what you might do." Sarah turned to her friend, her eyes shining with a mixture of determination and pain. "Don't be afraid for me, Liv. Be afraid for him." As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows across the apartment, Sarah began to mentally prepare herself for the meeting the next day. She knew it would be difficult, that Mark's every word would be like salt in an open wound. But she was ready. Ready to begin her game of cat and mouse, ready to weave the web that Mark would eventually become entangled in. Night fell, and with it, the last trace of the Sarah that once was. In her place emerged a woman driven by pain and a thirst for revenge, determined to make Mark pay for what he had done. The stage was set, and the drama was about to unfold. The cafe was packed when Sarah arrived, promptly at 3 o'clock. She spotted Mark immediately, sitting in the corner, his shoulders slumped and deep circles under his eyes. For a brief moment, his heart wavered. But then, the memory of Jessica's message flooded his mind, and determination returned with a vengeance. Sarah approached the table, her face a mask of calm. "Hello, Mark," she said coldly. Mark stood up abruptly, spilling his coffee. "Sarah, you came. I wasn't sure if you were going to come." She sat down, ignoring his outstretched hand. "You wanted to talk. So talk." Mark swallowed hard, sitting down again. "Sarah, I know I made a terrible mistake. There are no excuses for what I did, but I need you to know that it meant nothing. It was a moment of weakness, and..." "One moment." Sarah interrupted, her voice cutting like a blade. "The messages I've seen suggest something more than a moment, Mark." He looked down, guilt evident in every line of his face. "I know. I lost myself, Sarah. But I love you. I love our life together. And now with the baby." Sarah felt a wave of nausea when she heard Mark mention the baby. She closed her eyes for a moment, fighting to maintain control. "The baby," she said slowly, opening her eyes to look at Mark. "The baby you were willing to abandon for your lover?" Mark reached across the table, trying to reach her hand. Sarah quickly removed it. "No, Sarah. I would never abandon you. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but it's over. I broke up with Jessica the day you found out. Please give me a chance to make it right." Sarah watched him, her heart beating furiously. Part of her wanted to scream, to expose all his lies right there, in the middle of the crowded cafe. But another part, the cold, calculating part that had been growing inside her, knew this was the time to put her plan into action. She took a deep breath, forcing tears to come to her eyes. "Mark, I don't know if I can trust you again." Hope shone in his eyes. "I'll do anything, Sarah. Anything to win back your trust." Sarah let the silence hang between them for a moment, as if considering. Finally, she said, Maybe we can try. For the baby." The relief on Mark's face was palpable. He smiled, tears in his eyes. "Oh, Sarah. You won't regret it. I'll fix this, I promise." Sarah forced a small smile, even though inside she was screaming. "It's going to take time, Mark. And it won't be easy." "I know," he nodded vigorously. I'll go to therapy, whatever it takes. I'll be the husband you deserve. As Mark spoke, making promises and oaths, Sarah felt her plan taking shape. His every word was a thread in the web she was weaving, a web he would not escape. Can we try to have dinner together tonight? Mark asked hesitantly. At home. Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly. Okay, at 8. As she got up to leave, Sarah felt Mark's hand touch her arm. She turned around, meeting his eyes full of hope and remorse. Thank you, Sarah, he said softly. I love you. Sarah forced another smile, ignoring the sharp pain in her chest. See you later, Mark. As she walked out of the cafe, Sarah felt a toxic mix of emotions, pain, anger, and dark satisfaction. The first part of his plan was underway. Mark thought he was on the path to redemption, but in reality, he was taking the first steps towards his downfall. Sarah stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the cloudy New York sky. A storm was approaching, both literally and metaphorically, and she was ready to dance in the rain. Weeks passed, and Sarah's plan was in full swing. She had woven a complex web of lies and manipulations, always keeping Mark on his toes, never letting him feel completely safe. That morning, Sarah woke up early, a cold smile playing on her lips. Today was the day she would take the next crucial step in her revenge plan. Mark entered the kitchen, adjusting his tie. Good morning, love, he said hesitantly, still unsure of how to act around her. Sarah forced a sweet smile. Good morning, darling. Ready for the big day? Mark nodded, visibly nervous. Yes, the presentation to new customers. It is crucial for the company. Sarah approached, adjusting his tie with nimble fingers. You'll do fine, I'm sure, she said, her voice honey and venom at the same time. Mark held her hands, his eyes searching hers. Sarah, I want you to know how much it means to me to have you by my side again. I know we're still working on it, but... Sarah interrupted him with a soft kiss. Sure, let's not talk about that right now. Today is your big day, remember? He smiled, relieved. You're right. Thank you for being so understanding. As Mark left, Sarah grabbed her cell phone, quickly typing a message, everything's ready. He's on his way. The answer came almost instantly, understood. The plan is underway. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline rush through her veins. She knew that at this very moment, an email was being sent to every executive at Mark's company, including new customers. An email containing fabricated evidence of financial fraud, all pointing to Mark as the culprit. She imagined the scene, Mark, in the middle of his presentation, being interrupted. The shock on his face when the accusations were made. The panic when he realized that his career, his reputation, everything was crumbling around him. The phone rang, breaking Sarah out of her thoughts. It was Olivia. Sarah, are you sure about this? Olivia's voice was thick with concern. It could completely destroy his life. Sarah felt a pang of guilt, quickly drowned out by the anger that still burned in her chest. He destroyed mine first, Liv. He deserves to feel the same despair I felt. But what about the baby? Don't you think you're going too far? Sarah stroked her belly, now slightly protruding. I'm doing this for the baby. He deserves a world where justice prevails, where actions have consequences. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. Finally, Olivia spoke. I hope you know what you're doing, Sarah. I'm just afraid that in the end, you'll end up hurting yourself just as much as he did. As she hung up the phone, Sarah felt a wave of doubt. Was she really doing the right thing? But then, the image of Mark and Jessica invaded her mind, and her resolve strengthened. She walked to the window, watching the city outside. Somewhere right now, Mark's world was falling apart. And she, the architect of his downfall, waited at home, like the concerned, supportive wife he thought she was. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her actions. There was no going back now. The storm she had conjured was about to reach its peak, and she was in the eye of the storm, ready to watch the destruction she had orchestrated. The phone rang again. It was Mark. Sarah took a deep breath, preparing herself to play the role of the shocked and confused wife. The next act of their revenge drama was about to begin. Sarah answered the phone, her voice carefully modulated to sound concerned. Mark? What happened? Mark's voice on the other end of the line was a mix of panic and despair. Sarah, I don't know what's going on. Everything has fallen apart. They're accusing me of fraud, saying I have evidence against me. I swear, I didn't do anything like that. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling a wave of contradictory emotions. Part of her was elated at the success of her plan, while another part was writhing with guilt as she heard the desperation in his voice. "Oh my God, Mark. This is terrible. Where are you now?" she asked, her voice shaking in a way that even she herself didn't know was entirely fake. "I'm leaving the office. I've been suspended until further notice." "Sarah, I'm scared." The vulnerability in his voice made Sarah's heart sink. For a moment, she almost confessed everything, almost screamed that she was behind it all. But then, the image of Mark with Jessica came back to her mind, and her resolve strengthened. "Come home, darling. Let's work this out together," she said, surprising herself with the sincerity in her own voice. While waiting for Mark to arrive, Sarah paced the apartment, her mind in a whirl. She hadn't expected to feel this way, torn, confused, almost regretful. The sound of the key in the lock brought her out of her thoughts. Mark walked in, looking completely defeated. His eyes were red, his hair was disheveled, his tie was loose. Upon seeing Sarah, he broke down. "I didn't do this, Sarah. I swear on our son's life, I didn't do any of this," he sobbed, falling to his knees. Sarah ran to him, wrapping her arms around him almost instinctively. His familiar scent, the warmth of his body, it all took her back to the happy days they shared. For a moment, she almost forgot that she was responsible for all of this. "I believe you, Mark," she whispered, surprised to realize that part of her actually did. Mark pulled away, looking into her eyes with a mixture of gratitude and desperation. "What are we going to do? My career is ruined. How am I going to support our family?" The mention of family made Sarah feel like she'd been punched in the stomach. She looked down at her belly, now visibly pregnant, and suddenly the weight of her actions fell on her like a ton of bricks. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice shaking. "Together." While comforting Mark, Sarah felt her revenge plan fall apart. The satisfaction she expected to feel was replaced by an aching emptiness. She had managed to hurt Mark, yes, but at what cost? Her son's future, the stability she valued so much, everything was at risk now. Sarah's phone vibrated in her pocket. It was a message from his accomplice. Phase 2 complete. Ready to proceed with the final destruction of his reputation. Awaiting your orders. Sarah looked at the message, then at Mark, who was still sobbing in her arms. At that moment, she realized she was at a crossroads. Continuing with his plan would mean completely destroying not only Mark, but potentially his son's future as well. Stopping now could save something, but it would mean living with the guilt of what I had already done. With a heavy heart and a whirling mind, Sarah knew that the decision she made in the next few moments would change the course of their lives forever. The clock ticked, and his family's fate hung in the balance. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel. There will always be new videos, and you won't want to miss any of the excitement. Sarah looked at the phone in her hand, the weight of the decision crushing her. She could feel the heat of Mark's body against hers, hear his muffled sobs. Every fiber of his being screamed in conflict. "Mark," she said softly, pulling back slightly to look into his eyes. "There's something I need to tell you." The fear in Mark's eyes was palpable. What else could have gone wrong? Sarah took a deep breath, feeling like she was on the edge of a cliff. I did something terrible." Mark frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" The words felt stuck in Sarah's throat, but she forced them out. "The accusations, the fraud, it was me. I orchestrated it all." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark pulled away from her as if he had been burned, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "What?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "How? Why?" Tears began to stream down Sarah's face. "I wanted you to suffer like I suffered when I found out about Jessica. I wanted to destroy you like you destroyed our marriage." Mark stumbled backwards, falling onto the couch. His face was a mask of pain and betrayal. "Sarah, I can't believe it. How could you?" Guilt and regret flooded Sarah. She fell to her knees before him, sobbing. "I was so hurt, so mad. I wasn't thinking straight. Mark, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Mark stared at her, his expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. Do you have any idea what you did? My career, our lives, everything is ruined. Sarah nodded, unable to hold back her tears. I know, and I'm going to fix this. I swear. She picked up the phone with shaking hands, quickly typing a message, abort everything. Undo what you can. That's an order. Mark watched silently, his breathing heavy. How do you hope to fix this, Sarah? How can we move forward from this? Sarah looked at him, her eyes begging for forgiveness. I don't know, but I'll do whatever it takes. Mark, I still love you. Despite everything, despite the pain that you've caused me, that I've caused us. I still love you. The silence that followed was tense, filled with unspoken emotions. Mark closed his eyes, running his hands over his face in a gesture of exhaustion. I don't know if I can forgive this, Sarah, he said finally, his voice low and tired. Just like I don't know if you can truly forgive me for what I did. Sarah felt her heart break even more, if that was possible. So what do we do now? Mark looked at her, then at her pregnant belly. His eyes softened slightly. I don't know. But we have to think about the baby now. He didn't ask to be born in the middle of this chaos we created. At that moment, the doorbell rang, making them both jump. Sarah and Mark exchanged apprehensive glances. Who could it be? Mark asked. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Would it be someone related to your plan? The police? Or something completely unexpected? With her heart in her throat, she got up to answer the door, aware that whatever was on the other side could change their lives forever. The tension in the air was palpable as she turned the doorknob, preparing to face the consequences of her actions. Sarah opened the door with shaking hands, her heart beating so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of her chest. To his surprise and momentary relief, it was Olivia who was there, an expression of intense concern on her face. Sarah, I came as soon as I could. What's going on? Olivia asked, quickly entering the apartment. Your eyes widened when you saw Mark sitting on the couch, looking completely defeated. Sarah closed the door, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. I told him everything. Olivia gasped, looking from Sarah to Mark. Oh my God. Sarah, are you sure? Mark stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on Olivia. Did you know? Did you know what she was doing? Olivia's silence was answer enough. Mark let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Great. Just great. So everyone was plotting against me. It wasn't like that, Mark, Olivia began, but was interrupted by the shrill sound of Sarah's phone. Sarah answered hesitantly, putting it on speakerphone. He was her contact, the man she had hired to carry out her revenge plan. Sarah, we have a problem, the man's voice sounded strained. I can't undo everything. The charges have already been filed. The police are on the way. Sarah's blood ran cold. She looked at Mark, seeing the shock and fear in his eyes. No, Sarah murmured, panic rising in her voice. This can't be happening. Mark approached her, his expression a mixture of anger and despair. Sarah, what did you do? What exactly did you put in those accusations? Before Sarah could respond, there was a loud knock on the door. Police. Open the door. Panic took over the environment. Olivia ran to the window, as if searching for an impossible escape route. Mark stood frozen, his face pale as paper. Sarah, feeling the weight of her actions more than ever, walked slowly towards the door. Wait, Mark said suddenly, grabbing Sarah's arm. His eyes met hers, a complex mix of emotions passing between them. Whatever happens now, remember our son. He is innocent in all of this. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm sorry about everything. With one last look at Olivia, who looked on the verge of breaking down, Sarah opened the door. 2 police officers entered, their faces serious and determined. Mark Thompson, one of them asked. Mark stepped forward, his voice surprisingly steady. It is me. You are under arrest on suspicion of financial fraud, the officer began reciting Mark's rights. Sarah watched, horrified, as they handcuffed her husband. The reality of what she had done finally hit her full force. She had wanted revenge, but now she realized the real cost of her actions. As Mark was led away, he looked at Sarah one last time. There was no anger in his eyes, Just a deep sadness and something that looked like forgiveness? "Take care of our son, Sarah," he said softly before being led out of the apartment. Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Olivia ran to hug her, but Sarah barely felt her touch. All she could think about was the chaos she had created, the life she had destroyed, not just Mark's, but her own and her unborn child's. As the door closed behind the officers and Mark, Sarah found herself confronted with the harsh reality of her choices. The future she had imagined, whether of revenge or reconciliation, had shattered. Now she would have to find a way to rebuild from the rubble, not just for herself, but for the innocent baby she carried. The apartment, once a home full of love and promise, now felt empty and cold. Sarah looked at her belly, stroking it gently. "I'll fix this," she whispered to her unborn child. "Somehow, I'm going to fix all of this." And so, as night fell over New York, Sarah found herself at the beginning of a new journey, one of redemption, forgiveness, and perhaps eventually healing. The path would be long and difficult, but she knew she had no choice but to follow it, for herself and her son's future. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel. There will always be new videos, and you won't want to miss any of the excitement.